Good evening. Good to have each, excuse me, each one of you here tonight. We are continuing in our, bear with me, I'm sorry, study of stewardship. I want to thank Sammy for honorable mention in a prayer. That's nice to hear, and I appreciate it really. We are studying stewardship. We are stewards because everything belongs to God and nothing belongs to us. He has entrusted a portion of his estate or his assets, whatever you want to call them, whatever he gives for us, to us during our lifetime. He has given us instructions for the performance of our duties as stewards, and we will be held accountable for how we've done those, how we've dealt with the responsibilities that we were given. Ran out. Austin's got a few more. I don't know. Not your fault. I guess I wasn't a very good copy steward, was I? But we need to, you can take one of those and go make copies if you don't mind. How many don't have one? How many don't want one? No, okay. I think we may have enough, thank you. Okay. We concluded last week our stewardship of our bodies. We're going to look at stewardship of families and children, more about children as it tends to be. As a steward, were you asked if you wanted to be a steward? Nope, I wasn't. Were you asked to be born? There are a lot of things in life we think we have control over. But and I started with this thing and thinking back, there are the things that we can't control or more numerous on a wide scale. The thing I heard my daughter-in-law, Clay's wife, say, I think she had been talking to her mother. She said, I didn't choose y'all as my parents. I didn't get to choose my kids, but I did get to choose my husband. Interesting that be put that way, because there are things that we don't have any control over. And as I was looking through things that we don't choose to be born, we don't choose the time of our birth, we don't choose our race, our nationality, our sex, our parents, our siblings. Man has tried to control the weather. We can't even do that. And we didn't choose the time in history that we were born. Sometimes people say, I wish I'd have been born back at the time of this or of that, and we just can't do that. We try to control whether we have kids or not. Sometimes it doesn't work. We can't control what sex they are unless you adopt them. But we do get to choose our spouse. And we decide whether we want children or not. Now, that may not always work out, because I know of couples that have wanted children and couldn't have them. So it doesn't always work out that way. But there are things that we don't have control over, but there are some that we do. So when we talk about children as a stewardship, being stewards of that, remember that they're going to give the same answers to the questions that I just asked you. They didn't ask to be born. And this occurred to me whenever Clay was born, that, he doesn't have a choice. We brought him into this world, his mother and I. And it's my responsibility to teach him what he needs to know. When you think of children, he has here on number 3 that children are a blessing from God. And in Genesis, the 33rd chapter, verse 5, and you don't have to turn there because these are just some highlight things. Jacob is returning from his father-in-law's place with his family, his new family that he's never brought home before, with his wives and their nurses and I guess concubines for him, and his 12 children and all of his assets. And as he approaches, Esau comes out to meet him and says, "What is this that I see?" And there in that verse, he said, "The children which God hath graciously given your servant." Jacob understood that children are a gift from God. And we need to think of them in that respect. In Psalms of 127, verses 3 through 5, it says, "Lo, children are an heritage of the Lord." And that word heritage can carry the idea of an inheritance or a gift. They are an heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is his reward. As arrows are in the hand of a mighty man, so are children of the youth. Happy is the man that has his quiver full of them. They shall not be ashamed, but they shall speak with the enemies in the gate. In the Jewish family, in their society, what was it more common to have? Larger families or smaller families? What did they tend to have? Larger families. It was the thing that was, I guess, part of their heritage. I mean, look what Jacob had. He had 12, and then from those 12, a massive amount of people came. That God said, you won't be able to number them as the sands of the heavens. So we keep in mind that God did give, he gives us children. And when he gives them to us, what condition are they in? I'm sorry? Okay, if they're healthy, I mean, let's just make another thing. They're, first of all, what we're talking about is purity. They're pure. They are innocent. They're humble. Who else should have those same qualities of that child? Christians. Sorry? Christians. Everybody should have them. When Jesus was asked, when the children came to him, in Matthew 18, it says, "And at the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And he called a little child unto him, set him in the midst, and said, Verily I say unto you, except you be converted and become as little children, you cannot enter into the kingdom of heaven." We are to be childlike. So a child is something that God looks on favorably. What could be better than a newborn? At least we think that until you get him home or her home. And then first night or second night or whatever it takes, they don't sleep. But whenever you get a child, when you have a child born into your family or you adopt one, what is, as parents, what are your basic responsibilities for that child? Okay, taking care of his physical needs is probably the very first thing we think about, because you had to provide a place for him to be, food, clothing, shelter, medication, everything. That's the first thing that we think about. What else? Okay, bringing him up in the admonition of the Lord, and that's I was looking at that one as a lighter one because that really is going to be in all phases of it. You're going to keep that in mind. And what I was thinking more about is preparing him to go out into society on his own. You don't want your 45-year-old son, staying in your house and not doing anything. We want them to be productive citizens. And so that's part of what we're to do. But engaged in all that part is to prepare him for what God wants him to do.
That's a big responsibility when you do have a child, because you have to start from time to understand to teach it, and then go on up, and then you're still responsible until 18 when it maybe leaves and gets a job, you know? And you mothers and dads still even worry about the children when they leave home.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that one does. My wife does. I do too at times.
I've studied that enough to know that it's a big responsibility as soon as you have a child and all that. I really do.
It is. Don, you're right. It is a tremendous responsibility and something that people don't take as seriously as they should. In the world today, you're seeing people arrested for the abuse that they give to children, and they're doing harm to them, and that's not what we should be doing. Our basic thing should be taking care of those things, but getting him ready not only to be a citizen of the country, a working, functioning person, but to be a servant of God. That should be the uppermost thing that we think about in all things. In Ezekiel, the 18th chapter, verse 4, Ezekiel wrote that God says, "Behold, all souls are mine. As the soul of the Father, so also the Son of the soul is mine. The soul that sinneth, it shall die." And having brought life into existence through the natural process of procreation, we have a responsibility as husbands and as wives. There are different responsibilities, but it's a joint responsibility that we have for that child. Each of us will give an account, so I have got to prepare him or her for that. He wrote here, "I am responsible for training my child to be obedient to God so that they'll recognize who He is and their accountability to Him." To have a child to grow to know that what we're talking about tonight, he's got that responsibility, whether he wants it or not. If he chooses not to have a family, that's his thing, but he still is responsible to God for his stewardship here. And David writes here, "When I finally turn them loose to do, where do I want their spiritual journey to lead?" You know, I remember Carl Reeves, over the years as the boys were growing, he would say, "Roger, you're doing a good job with those boys." And I kept saying, "Carl, I don't know." I kept saying, it's kind of like throwing something up in the sky. It's going to come down. You just don't know how it's going to land when it comes. And I think they turned out pretty good. Sometimes I may take those words back sometimes too. But, you know, you have them for a very short time. Like Don said, about 18. Well, it depends. Sometimes before that, you lose it. But around that time when they get out of your house, they're no longer your direct responsibility. You should have some sway and some control over them to some extent. God gives parents the responsibility to teach their children the way of the Lord, and He has not delegated that to anybody. You can't delegate it to daycare. You can't delegate it to the state. Now, that's what some people may be advocating, is that, let's have universal this or child care, whatever. No. Those souls are mine that I have responsibility for. In Genesis, the 18th chapter, verses 18 through 9, and it's written here on your paper. This is what Abraham said about, Abraham was said of by God. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about Abraham what he has promised him. Abraham's heart was known to God, that he would raise his children the way he was supposed to. How many children did he? Well, I don't know how many he had. With his first wife, how many children did he have? One. Now, he remarried, and I think he had others. And then Ishmael, of course, was another one. But Abraham was a faithful man. Not only did he keep God's laws, even to the point of offering Isaac as a sacrifice, but instilled in them, and that went down, that same love of God. They knew of the promise, and they looked forward to the promise. So I must teach my children as a parent to love and obey God. In Deuteronomy 4, 9 through 10, he writes, "Only take heed to thyself and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen, and lest they depart from thy heart all the days of thy life. But teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons, especially the day that thou stoodest before the Lord thy God in Horeb, when the Lord said unto me, Gather me the people together, and I will make them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they shall live upon the earth, and that they may teach their children." Did Israel stick with that plan? No. What happened? Yeah, whenever they got into, it said those that were with Joshua's generation and lived there, and the next one did. But there arose a generation that what? Knew not God, didn't know the Lord. They didn't know what was what. And what happened to them? This is during the time of the judges. So do you remember they'd leave God, they'd be oppressed, they'd cry to God, God would raise up a judge, he would deliver them, they'd be happy for a while, they'd serve for a while, then they'd go back, and it was just a cycle over and over again.
Into that book, it says, man, I don't know the exact words, but it said that they did according to what was right in their own eyes.
You're right. That Israel did what was right. There was no king. I think there was no king that time, it said, and there was no king, and each man did what was right in his own eyes. That'd be chaos today. Can you imagine? There's enough of that going on as it is, but we're getting there. Yeah. If everybody did what they thought was the right thing to do, you wouldn't have, you couldn't be civil. There would be no civility. There'd be no law and order. Deuteronomy 6, 1 through 9, he says, "Now these are the commandments and the statutes and the judgments," if you want to get there, "which the Lord your God commanded to teach, that you may do them in the land where you're going to possess, that you might fear the Lord thy God, to keep his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee this day, and thy son and thy son's sons all the days of thy life, that thy days may be prolonged." In Exodus 20 and 12, there's another reference to that. Who's got it? Can read it right quick.
Honor your father and your mother. Today you may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you.
Now you may wonder, why did Roger throw that one in? That's one of the things that needs to be taught children, is to honor your father and your mother. And there is something said about that one over in, Ephesians? It's the first commandment with what? Promise. It goes back to the fifth commandment where God said, honor thy father and thy mother, that it may be that you may live long upon the earth. There was a promise given. It's not an ironclad promise, of course. But generally, if you honor your father and your mother and you love God and honor him, you can expect to live a decent life. A parent must teach his children to love and obey God, and I wrote in mind that there's no greater thing that we can teach our children. Now David wrote that this does not describe a passive activity where children absorb spiritual training by osmosis. Wish that were true. Wish it could be done that way, but it doesn't. Instead, it describes frequent, active, shameless parental involvement in training, in spiritual training. We're to raise children to the point that the faith that they ultimately have is their faith. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, you can ask Brooklyn, or Adams, our youngest granddaughter. She's 4. Who made the sun? God did. Who made the moon? God did. I think you could ask her, who made whatever? It wouldn't have to be things that God actually made, but she'd probably ascribe it to God. That's a good start. That's not complete, of course, but we have to work with them. And what we're trying to get them to be to the point is that when he or she understands something and believes it, it's not because mom and dad said it. It's because God said it. I remember having a discussion with one of the boys. And he said, Dad, I want to believe this, not because you believe it, but because I want to believe it. And I said, that's exactly what I want from you. Getting children to the age or to the stage that they understand. They understand what it's about, and they are doing that. Turn to Proverbs 22. This is a verse that we use a lot, and very rightly so, that almost anybody in here could quote without even reading it. What does 26 say there? Anybody?
Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it.
I like the New American Standard version. I mean, that's the one I've grown up with too, but the American Standard is a little bit different. It says, even when he is old, he won't depart from it. Train up a child in the way he should go. What is that word? What does that mean? What does train mean?
To develop.
I'm sorry?
To develop.
I'm sorry, I can't.
To develop.
To develop, okay. I've never trained dogs. I don't know how to do that. What do you do when you train a dog? What is it just, well, I don't know. Is it easy? Anybody train dogs? Cats? Repetition? I'm sorry, consistency, yeah. The word that's used here is found the Hebrew word is found 5 times in the Old Testament. 4 times it's translated dedicate. Here in Proverbs 22, it's written out as to train up a child. The word comes from the idea of put something into the mouth, and it deals with the process of teaching a baby to suck. Apparently, they don't always learn that at the beginning. But it does that. They can put something there to teach that child to suck. And here's what it goes on and says. To give elementary instructions, to imbue. Now, I had to learn this, find out what that word means, and I'll continue on. To train. Imbue is to permeate or influence as if by dyeing. Now, I don't mean being dead, but by dyeing a garment. Whenever you dye a garment a color, how long does that dye stay in there? For the rest of the time you have it, right? It keeps up with the idea of being to permeate, to get into it, to be there. So what God is saying, it's not just teaching, but to train a child. To get him to the point, and it carries the idea, the Hebrew literally is this, to initiate a child in accordance with his way. Every child is different. Every child learns differently. We had 3 boys, and each one of them was different. But you train children. If we don't train them, what are our chances? In Ecclesiastes 12, 13, and 14, remember that verse there at the end of the book that basically says what? We've heard the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments because of what? It applies, that's the real rendering it should be, really. It applies to every person. It is the person. But it's written, it is the whole of man. Not the duty was put in by the translators. It is what we're here for. And so we have got to do that for our children. They come here pure, and then they get, I don't think unpure is a good word, but they get adulterated. And David, who wrote this out, said, how will their spirits be adulterated? What friends, what books, what movies, what music, what clothes, what things, what ideas, what goals? They're going to get hit with everything. And more in today's society, the idea of no God or not serving God is rampant. Luke 17. Verse 1 through 3, Jesus said this. He said, it is impossible that offenses will come, but woe to him through whom they come. It would be better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he cast into the sea, than if he should offend one of these little ones. Now, he may not have been talking about children. He may have been talking about others. But the idea is the same. If we cast offenses, if we bring somebody down, we are wrong. How much do you love your children? How much do we love our children? What's more important? Whenever you're thinking about a child, what's the most important thing you think about? Do you think about where he's going to go to school? What's he going to do for a living? What kind of extracurricular activities will he be in? Will he be accepted by his peers? Or will he be bullied and things? Now, those things are going to happen. Just different things. But more importantly, and I'm not saying these things are not important, because they are. But we place sometimes, and people outside the church I know are maybe worse about it, more on the physical side. Where's he going to go to school? What degree will he have? Rather than being, is he going to be a faithful child of God? Will he serve God? Will he respect others? It's ultimately important, and we have to teach them. Obedience to God and eternity in heaven must first be important to me before I can make it important to my children. How many of you realize that your kids are watching you? And sometimes you'll hear, but Mommy, you didn't do this, or Daddy, you didn't do that. They are good tattletales. Our stewardship begins, I think, whenever we reach the age of accountability. And we don't know when that is. But we have to be ready for when that child reaches that age. How do I teach my children to love God? And one of his examples here is Mary and Joseph with Jesus. And it crosses my mind from time to time that, thinking of Mary, when Gabriel left there, he's told her, you have been chosen, you're going to be overcome, and you will bear a child. He will be called the Son of God. And he leaves. What would you do at that point if that were you? Think about the awesome responsibility that was laid on Mary and Joseph. And I sometimes wonder, what would be the first thing you'd do? I mean, the first thing I'd do would be pray about it, for sure. But is there any difference in what they should have done for Jesus than what we should do for our kids? I mean, ideally, no, it's not. I mean, he did have a different role. Now, at 12, what was he doing at 12? He was in the synagogue doing what? Teaching and arguing with the people, the priests there that knew things, and was astonished. They were astonished at him, but he had that kind of knowledge. 12 years old. And whenever they found him, what did he tell them? What did he tell his parents? I must be about my father's business. First of all, he knew who his father was, and he wasn't talking about Joseph. But he knew that he had to be doing that. Tell them Bible stories over and over. I wrote down here VBS. The kids here love VBS. They love the singing of songs that Todd and Tyler lead them in. It's exciting. It's interesting to them. The kids want to learn. Oh, and by the way, we need more teachers in VBS. So if there's any of you that more with the grade side over there, the younger ones, see Jody, if you can, because we could use more people. Is that right, Jody? He said yes. Read the same stories over and over and over. How many times have you been told the story of Jonah or read it? Go give them passages. Let them think of things. Make it interesting for them. Let them see us doing it too. When our kids can see that we sit down with the Bible and we read it.
That's your responsibility as a father and neighbor. You know, a child will pick up on whatever you do. They can be 3 or 4 years old, and they'll pick up on how you do it around the house.
Exactly.
And everything.
Yeah, Don's saying they'll pick up on you. They'll watch you. They're watching you, and believe me, they're watching closely because they're going to start mimicking. What would you want them mimicking? The bad things you do? No, not really. Things that they've seen you do that are good. Teach them how to pray. I know one thing that we do with Clay and Jen started it with theirs is you get to a point with them that you let them do the prayer for the blessing for the food. And it's fun to listen because they get a little off track and they'll bless for everything there is. My little brother did that years and years ago. The word got out that don't ask Ronnie to lead prayer. But kids will do that. They'll mimic what they've heard, and that's great until they get to the point as their knowledge advances, they can become better. Let them see us pray. Let them hear us pray. Take them to worship. And that's what he has here. And I'm saying take them every time. Which means what? If you're going to take your kids to services, for every service, what happens? You have to be there. That's exactly right. You have to be there. And what better example can you be than by doing that? Because if he gets to the point he sees that mom takes them, and I know this has happened in families where the mother takes the kids and she goes to church and dad stays home. What eventually does that child see? Daddy's not going to church. Why do I have to go to church? It is. That's a good chance to teach and say, and Daddy sit down and say, Daddy's wrong. Daddy needs to change. And we're going to go.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Being about stewardship, I have to say it.
Go ahead.
As parents, I think that's when we first start learning who God truly is. mean by that is, it's a type, raising a child is a type of our relationship with God. And everything we have responsibility to do for those children, God does for us already. And we can only understand that love that He has for us, a portion of that love He has for us, because of how much we love our children. And no matter how mad you get at your child because of the disobedience, all they have to do is come to you and ask you for forgiveness and pardon.
Yeah.
And at that moment, you start understanding love. And you start understanding the responsibility. And we're not taking them to church. How often are we concerned that we pray to God, or we look that He's not there for us as a child? Never be that word. So that stewardship, our responsibility is to put that down. Just like we are toward God, our children do the same thing to us, and I think that's a lesson in itself as well.
Yeah, I think you're right.
If we are disrespectful, how are we being in our life? So there's so much of a type there. Type of any kind of relationship.
How did God show His love for us? In many ways, yeah. That's the example that He talks about in John. But the love of God is shown throughout the Bible. Everything He did, creating us, giving us everything that we have, the relationships that we have, the good ones, not the bad ones.
I think it calls His children is the ultimate
Yeah.
way of showing love.
Well, when you go through the Genesis, when you go through, is it Matthew or which one of the genealogy back to from Jesus back to God, what does He say about Adam? It's so and so the son of so and so who the son of God. Adam was the son of God. The first Adam was the son of God, literally. Now, not through a natural birth, no. But that's what He made us. And we have that responsibility to those kids.
Remember the one thing that is for us was when Christ set a child in front and said that we should act, we should be like a child.
And why did He say that? Because a child hasn't learned a lot of bad things.
He wanted us to be like children.
Children don't hold grudges. Children, as a rule, don't say bad things unless they've heard those things. The attitude of a child is the kind of attitude we should have. And Rick's right. We learn when you have children, you learn a whole lot more about your relationship because you're now sitting in that same place. I'm not saying we take God's place, but we're in that same position. We're the father. We are the ones that are tasked with that primary responsibility. I think we'll go ahead and we'll probably go into another lesson after this, but I appreciate what you've said. This is serious, and I think now I realize that a lot of you in here, we've already passed that time in our lives that we're no longer raising children, but some of you are, and I hope there's been some help. Thank you.